Thank you for tuning in to another episode of InRange. I'm coming to you today with the Desert Tech MDR once again, which has been profiled on this channel quite a bit, 308 and 5.56. And one of the conclusions I came to with this gun was that in 5.56, especially with a longer barrel or a suppressor on it, this gun balanced incredibly well and was fantastic as a bullpup, the best bullpup on the market. I'll easily go on record saying that. But I did also say that in 308 it was very jumpy and a lot of recoil and had some issues. And some of the things that I recommended was a longer handguard and a longer barrel. And guess what we have today? A longer handguard and a longer barrel. We do have Desert Tech's new muzzle brake on this. But guess what? This is in 6.5 Creedmoor. So you convert the MDR back to its 308 config, or if it's already in a 308 config, which is the bolt, the ejection port, and the magazine release for the most part. But then if their gun is configured in 308, you merely, literally, take off the handguard, undo a couple screws, pull off the barrel, put on the 6.5 Creedmoor barrel, and you're now chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. One of the great advantages of the MDR's design was its easily changed cartridge compatibility, and this is an example of that. Barrel change, bam, you're in 6.5 Creedmoor. I literally put the 6.5 Creedmoor barrel on and started shooting, no issues whatsoever. But then when I started looking at the market cost of ammunition, I found MagTech FMJ 6.5 Creedmoor ammo, 140 grain, at prices cheaper than 308. In fact, during this pandemic right now, cheaper than 5.56 in many instances. So I decided, obviously 6.5 Creedmoor with its ballistic coefficient and its long-range capabilities is more designed for a different course of fire than the two-gun action challenge match. But this gun actually recoils really nicely in 6.5 Creedmoor. It's very controllable, and with 25-round Magpul mags, why not just use this at the two-gun course of fire and put 140 grains on target instead of 55 grains with every shot fired? And if this thing holds up the way I think it will, I think we're going to see really good scores today, even though I'm firing, essentially almost triple the amount of bullet mass onto each target per round fired, and not losing a lot in capacity when you look at a 25-round magazine. So I think that'll be the first thing we want to do to experiment with the 6.5 Creedmoor in the MDR, but then also in other videos we're going to take it out at longer distances and actually show you the capabilities of this at places where it's more apt for that cartridge. But if this thing can do well at a CQB type course of fire where we got targets out to 150 yards that are small but still only 150 yards, then we take it out to the other course of fire and do stuff out to 500 meters or further, this might be one of the most well-rounded designs on the market. Now, in terms of the config, pretty simple. I've got a Magpul bipod on this. This is very fast to deploy, but not as fast to put away like the Harris. But it's also very lightweight and doesn't add a lot of balance problems to this bullpup design. And so I went with that. Plus, it actually matches color, which is kind of cool. And today I've got the Primary Arms ACSS 1:8 variable optic on this. I came to find that the actual, so far in my testing, the bullet drop compensator on this, which is designed for 5.56 and 308, actually works really close for the 6.5 Creedmoor if you just hold 6 o'clock on your targets, because the ballistic coefficient of the Creedmoor cartridge means that it actually shoots a little higher and stays a little flatter shooting. But that's a topic for another day. So we're going to run this through 3 stages of fire today in 6.5 Creedmoor, and I'm going to come back to you with conclusions about what it's like to run the Desert Tech MDR and 6.5 Creedmoor on the clock. All right, so the first stage of the match is the longest range stage we have today. We have mini IPSCs, which are quite small, at 150 yards, and then full-size IDPA targets at about 75 yards, which makes them quite easy presentations. But the reason for that stage is you start off having to be precise, and you can be really quick on those, but you have to go back and forth. Hit! 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 The MDR performed incredibly well, as one would expect with 6.5 Creedmoor and a precision gun and a precision round. Reality is I went 1 for 1 on every target on this stage without any issues whatsoever. Magpul bipod did wonderfully, and the overall length of the bullpup actually serviced me quite well while crawling under those sticks. So for this stage, MDR absolutely rocked, but looking at the score sheets in general, I'm pretty sure that this was right up there with all of the best AR-15 scores today, so pretty rad. Okay, so the second stage of the day, start behind that barricade, shoot through the slot, then move over, and then a single shot on the middle target, back and forth. Suicide sprints again, but all offhand. Hit. Oh. Last one, finish strong. No issues with having hits. The problem I had is I had 2 malfunctions. And I'm pretty certain that I mentioned at the beginning of this video that I've had 0 malfunctions with this gun, but guess what? All of my testing was off the clock and shot from prone. And I think I have the gas system set just low enough, or the gas system is currently set just low enough, that when you have proper firm grip on the gun and you're in a prone position where there's really very little opportunity for the gun to move, it means that it cycles properly. But when I was shooting offhand, I think I honestly short or weak shouldered it, for lack of a better term, a couple times, and that caused 2 malfunctions. Now, one thing that's an issue with all bullpups, not just the MDR, is that when a malfunction happens, you don't really know what happened. But to the MDR's benefit, I pulled the mag, ran the action, stuck in the mag, ran the action, and it chambered around and ran fine. And that cleared the malfunction. So while I couldn't identify what exactly happened, I was able to clear it and keep going. So that's a big plus. I do think I need to set the gas setting up 1 notch. I'm not going to change that here at the match, because changing things at the match is a bad idea. I will be doing that after the match. We do still have 1 more stage to go, though. All right, so the final stage of the match is essentially an ambi drill. I have to shoot around 2 sides of a barricade, and the reality is some of this was set up where you couldn't really lean out on your weak side, but you couldn't really lean out on the left side and actually get a hit. You have to switch shoulders to be able to do it properly. Hit! Yeah, hit! Cost like $6 to make. Hit! 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 I'll probably go to Walgreens today and just do that. Hit! You ever get the, what do you call it? No, I need to ask for that. Barrel. The barrel. I just don't know why people are shooting on the far side first and going to the other and then they go to the right. I think people are thinking about it. I was thinking about it. that was a good stage to show that the MDR is really excellent for this as a bullpup. Even though I have it configured in the right-hand configuration, the reality is the spent cases eject forward, and you can actually shoulder this support side, even configured in a right-hand config, and they just go past your face. So you don't even really need to change that, and this ejection port really does work well for that ambi, regardless of switching it out. I did have one more malfunction. Again, I'm quite certain at this point it's just a gas setting, and offhand, that's a little bit there. So I was a little more cognizant of this on this stage. I only had one of them for 25 or 26 rounds fired or whatever it was. So the reality is the gas setting needs to be bumped up one notch for offhand shooting, and that's just something you learn on the clock. Gosh, you don't learn this stuff except on the clock. It's just how it works. So this is the MDR with the handguard taken off. This is the 6.5 barrel that we were just using in the match. And it came out of the box set to N for normal gas setting, which worked just fine in prone and in testing off the clock. But of course, on the clock, we had a few short strokes, and I think we need a little extra gas with this MagTech ammunition for offhand to keep it 100% reliable. So how this works is if you go counterclockwise, you take gas away, minus, and suppressed. And if you go clockwise, you add gas. So we've got a plus symbol here for normal plus, and then one more click to the right is adverse. We definitely do not need adverse. You can do this without taking the handguard off. There are slots cut for that purpose, but I figured for the video it would be much easier and visible for you to do it this way. So let's get a full magazine of ammunition and shoot offhand just as a test fire, and then we'll have final conclusions. Okay, so you saw me change the gas settings from N to plus, but what you didn't see on the video is I came out here and had catastrophic malfunction set to the plus setting. Double feeds, all sorts of issues, really big issues, not like I had at the match. And clearly I did not need to be on the plus setting away from N, I needed to be on normal. But when I set it to normal and went back to trying to do a mag dump, I had the same issues I had at the match. And so at that point I decided I was going to stop wasting ammunition, which is hard to acquire in this time and age, and I contacted Desert Tech directly. At that point I come to find out that they ship the 6.5 rifles with a 20 round PMag, not a 25 round PMag, because there's something about the geometry of the cartridge in 6.5 Creedmoor that makes the 25 round PMags problematic. Well, that makes sense now, because when I tested the gun out and did my original zeroing at range, I did it with a 20 round magazine and had no issues, as I said at the beginning of the video. So just to confirm that, I've got here, this is not a PMag, but it is a DPMS steel SR25 pattern mag. I'm gonna go ahead and do a mag dump here on the video just to confirm what they're saying is correct. And if this runs reliably on the N setting, then I actually cost myself quite a bit of placement at the match by using 25 round PMags when I thought I was giving myself an advantage. I was actually giving myself a disadvantage. Let's go ahead and give this a whirl. And it worked just fine. Locked back, no problems. And that's a shame that I used 25 round PMags at the match, and I wish I'd known that. But if you're going to go with a 6.5 MDR, make sure you stick with the 20 round mags because of that magazine geometry. Let's go ahead and get to overall conclusions. Okay, I said at the beginning of this video that I thought this would be quite competitive on the clock, and in spite of having two malfunctions, or actually more than two malfunctions, as a result of using 25 round mags instead of 20 round mags, I actually placed 7th out of 28 shooters at the Two Gun Action Challenge match, which has somewhat diminished capacity because of the current ongoing pandemic, etc. But when you put that into context, using a 6.5 Creedmoor and a 140 grain bullet per round fired versus 55 grain, 5.56, which is the vast majority of shooters at this match, 7th out of 28, even with a couple of malfunction clearances, is really good performance. That said, on the long range stage, when I didn't have a malfunction, the first stage that you saw in this video, I actually was 2nd overall out of all 28 shooters. Now, that says a lot. And the recoil impulse with the 6.5 Creedmoor MDR is really quite controllable. Controllable so much, in fact, that I think that if I hadn't had those malfunctions, I would have probably been maybe 3rd, something like that. We'll have to test that again to find out. The muzzle brake, I said, wasn't that offensive. Turns out it kind of is. The people with the timers were backing off. This thing is loud if you're not just directly behind it. But if you are directly behind it, this muzzle brake is very effective in recoil mitigation, and that makes it very useful. And so when you get into 308 or 30 caliber or 6.5 Creedmoor cartridges, full-size cartridges, I do believe that there's a value to a muzzle brake. I do not believe there's a value to a muzzle brake to 5.56 and intermediate cartridges. So this is when I would start thinking a muzzle brake makes sense. So I'm going to go ahead and say that that as of now, with my first run on the clock, in spite of having malfunctions for being ignorant about the 25 round magazine issue, the 6.5 Creedmoor MDR is absolutely superb. When I was testing this out just to get a zero, I was out at the range not filming, and I was making reliable hits out to 600 and 700 yards without really a lot of effort, because that cartridge is fantastic. Now, you're going to ask about the optic. This is a primary arms 1:8 ACSS, and while the BDC on it actually works really well for this cartridge, I'm going to go ahead and say this optic at the 2-gun action challenge match was quite terrible. The eye box is not good, and I took a lot of time getting behind it and getting a sight picture when I could have been much faster with something else. So this is one of the lower priced LPVOs on the market. It absolutely held zero. It had no problems with that. But what I did have problems with was the eye box and getting a quick acquisition of a sight picture, even on the 1 setting. So that's one of the things you get when you get to a more expensive LPVO, is easier acquisition and better eye box. So you're not like fishing for the sight picture when you're trying to get on the target. All of that costing time. So that said, it did work reliably, and I didn't lose zero, and the optics are clear. So if you're not going to use this in a dynamic environment, I would have no issues with it. But the primary arms ACSS 1:8 here, I would not really recommend in a dynamic high-speed environment. But at this point, oh, and on top of that, the Magpul bipod was excellent, really easy to deploy, and putting it away is an administrative task that I'm not that worried about compared to trying to get away fast. So that's easy. I would like to have a QD on this though, because when you go up to a barricade or need to stick through a wall, you have to kind of deploy this just to go through the portals, which you may have already seen on the video. So we're going to be doing more work with the 6.5 Creedmoor MDR. I'm going to do actually long range work with it, get you some footage of that with a different optic, quite honestly. And I also have some other stuff coming from Desert Tech as well, including their SRS precision bolt rifle. And we're going to do some comparisons between the two, because they're both chambered in 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, what I do want to say is I want to thank Desert Tech for shipping out the barrel. I already had the MDR rifle, but they shipped out the 6.5 Creedmoor barrel for me to be able to do videos for you. And the SRS, which will come in later videos, is a loaner. I don't get to keep that. Wish I did. It's pretty awesome. But all the ammunition that I spent to do this, including a bunch of mag dumps you didn't see here in this video, which, yeah, while I said it was cheaper than a lot of other stuff on the market, still not easy to get and still relatively expensive in this time and space, and I don't know if it's easily replaceable. So what I need to do is thank the Patreon supporters that make it possible to do videos like this. Me being out here literally doing mag dumps of 6.5 Creedmoor is because this channel is completely viewer supported and has no sponsors or advertisers, which also means I get to give you a very fair and honest review, including all the warts and the good things that happen with things like learning about the 25 round magazine, or really not being that big a fan of this particular optic. And by having no overlords, we can give you the honest and absolute truth about our experiences. So I need to thank the Patreon supporters for making that possible, and every round you saw fired in this match and this series, and videos you didn't see so far, where I just dumped rounds trying to get this to work with that magazine I didn't know about, were all because of Patreon supporters, and I have to thank you guys heartily. You keep InRangeTV alive. If you're not a supporter already, please consider it. If you can't, we do understand. You still can find all of our content on multiple distribution networks, not just YouTube, and you can find them all at inrange.tv/watch. And the one thing you can do for us is share with your friends. Thanks a lot for watching.